discussion, the building of a new industry. Unfortunately, someone from Harvest 360 could not make it. So we have found a replacement for that panel to be with Art, who is Heather Kuma. Heather is a cannabis attorney specializing in real estate and land use for the New Jersey office of Vicente Cedarburg, and she got her start by joining the local Students for Sensible Drug Policy chapter 17 years ago. Art Hans is the founder and president of our presenting sponsor, Hans Construction, which provides material erected, turnkey construction management and general contracting services to the industrial, commercial, and cannabis markets in New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. So let's go ahead and everybody's up on stage. How's everyone doing?
Good. How are you?
Good, Jelani. That was a mouthful you said there.
Oh, well, you know, if you didn't send us like those long intros about
We'll have to whittle that one down.
Yeah. And so, welcome everyone. Let's go ahead and start with you, Art. How is it constructing in one of the most densest states in the country, and are there any benefits or challenges to that?
I think that the New Jersey marketplace has its own unique set of challenges. I was getting some budget numbers for a particular type of project yesterday, and I called an associate in Ohio and in Virginia, and I was amazed at the differences in prices. We are in a built environment in New Jersey, so there is already a lot of area that are taken up, more urban areas. And so the challenges that we face for building cannabis is it going to be in an urban area or a rural area? They each have their own advantages and disadvantages. The urban areas typically have the infrastructure for gas and electric. They have some legacy buildings, but they do pose some permitting problems. Whereas out in rural areas where you may not have the pushback from local communities and you have more land to work with, we often find that the electric and gas, the infrastructure is not there to support the construction.
So, Heather, I know we've talked about this previously before. What does New Jersey need to do to make construction and real estate more accessible, especially to a lot of these micro license applicants and people that are really trying to get their foot in the door?
Sure. There's a couple things. The first biggest thing is basically educating municipalities on the process, on the industry, using different out-of-state examples. Right now, you see a bunch of municipalities that are temporarily banning it, or they're uneasy about it. And I have 10 years experience both in the public and private sector, almost 6 years working at the Jersey City Redevelopment Agency. So I tend to have like a municipal kind of mindset when it comes to this stuff. And to make things more accessible regarding the real estate and the construction, you first have to work with municipalities, because they're the ones that are going to be creating the ordinances of where it's permitted and where it's not permitted. Without having the ordinances in place, there's no access to those municipalities itself. That would be the first thing to do. And they need guidance, they need education, not just like the mayor or the councilman. You have to really talk to both the planning directors, planning staff, the building department, the construction code officer. You want them to be prepared to know how this new industry works and what for them to look for, to make them kind of feel at ease, so they can go through the process of both creating and implementing an ordinance for the industry to expand. The other thing that we should look at, one thing the state can do, one of the things that are in the legislature right now that is, I believe it's a huge problem, is that it doesn't allow any sort of applicants to receive any state or local economic incentives. And I'm talking about like tax incentives, or even something for like, say, getting like light bulbs or sustainable light bulbs or anything like that. And that's a huge problem. Especially with the New Jersey Economic Development Corporation, there's a lot of incentives and economic incentives can be implemented for this to make it easier and to increase access, especially for those social equity applicants. That is something that, I mean, New Jersey Economic Development Corporation has worked with small businesses before to help them set them up. So there should be no difference with this industry. So I hope with the, if there is a future cleanup bill, and I hope there is, they take out that provision that prohibits applicants in cannabis to utilize state and local economic incentives.
And so, Art, as the industry matures, what are the construction questions the market is going to have to keep an eye out for as this goes forward?
I think that the market should consider those questions now before the industry matures, because as the industry matures, the things that will make people successful are efficiency, low operating cost, and there's many people that believe that GMP, good manufacturing practices, which is a way of developing your facility, designing the workflow, and the way product is handled. These are going to become very important in the future, particularly after federal legalization. The people that don't take efficiency and GMP into account now are going to be at a disadvantage operationally in the future. So I think the key is to concentrate now on being very, very deliberate and cautious about your design and how you implement your facility.
Heather, earlier you talked about, you always touch a lot on education. What type of education do you think municipalities and clients alike need in order to enter this space?
Sure. I would say they first need to educate them and training. It's not just like, I'm going to read a book or anything like that. You really are thinking about training people in this new industry. We are the garden state, and we are also in the pharmaceutical belt. Huge opportunities for our state to become #1 in the country in research, implementation, opportunities to gain ahead. But with no experience in that, it's given. So I would say you want a training session. You basically almost want like business incubators. That's what I would love to have, where people can really learn from companies that are already in the space. And how can we learn from other states? Because one of the things I always hear from municipalities itself is they kind of freak out, seeming like we're the first state to ever implement this, and we're not. And there's so much to be learned from other states. And let's use those resources. Let's talk to Massachusetts. A lot of, for some reason, New Jersey really likes to talk to Massachusetts more than they like to talk to like California, because, East Coast mentality there. But let's learn what worked in other states, what didn't work in other states, and how can we apply that to New Jersey.
And so, Art, when you're building a business, how can smaller clients and micro businesses build something while keeping the flexibility for additional space, as the CRC chair was referencing earlier?
I think it's important to keep in mind, whenever people talk about a micro grow and then future expansion, they always look at how they can increase the canopy. But canopy is only one portion of a cannabis grow facility. So as you look to the future, make sure that you're providing adequate expansion in all areas of the operation. With increased canopy, you have increased drying and processing requirements and increased staff requirements, and that's going to require simple things like bathrooms and lunchrooms and locker rooms. So don't hinder your operation by forgetting that part of the build.
We've got a question from the audience here. I'll go ahead and touch on it. How is someone who is new to the industry able to participate, especially for those who are everyday workers who want to start or join a business in cannabis? With a cap of 37 cultivators, demand will far exceed supply for the first 2 years. How will processors be able to produce if they do not own a cultivation license as well? You've talked a lot about social equity, Heather. You want to talk about that?
Well, I think as we talked about it, it's micro businesses, there's no cap on micro businesses. So even though there's 37 cultivation sites that are limited, applications that are limited right now, there are other opportunities to get into this system there. So yeah, there's 37, but that's not including micro businesses. So micro business cultivators, that's like an unlimited amount right now that could really provide opportunity for people.
And for you, Art, could you explain some of the different construction concerns for retail, delivery, consumption, and cultivation spaces, and talk about how businesses should manage that cost?
I think that one of the big areas in cultivation is certainly the mechanical systems that are involved, and I think that for people who are just getting started, about the only way they're going to be able to manage that cost is to phase their build out so that they bring on portions of the facility at a time as they generate cash flow. From a retail standpoint, we see some very high-end dispensaries being built. I think that as time goes by, we're going to see a simpler environment. If you go to Canada and go to dispensaries there, they're very low key. They don't have the architectural flair that a lot of our facilities in this country have. As far as the consumption, I haven't really worked on, I think you're talking about more of a cafe type consumption area. And we have not had experience in that area yet because there haven't been any in this state. So it's difficult to address what they'll be.
And Heather, what is it exactly that clients and everyone needs to know about the urban real estate market and the rural real estate market?
Sure. Well, we're looking at the rural real estate market. I mean, as Art said before, yeah, there's going to be more land, but you're going to be dealing with having to really put in infrastructure there. So there's usually a lack of utilities. We're talking about energy, water, how you're going to get that. They're in a lot of areas. They're not meant for that high demand. That's a huge problem. And you need to look at properties. And when you're looking at rural properties, ask where the utilities are. See if there's ways for them to hook it up. What kind of water system do they have? Is it public water? Is it private? What sort of sewage system? All these things that you need to ask. Who is the electric company? Are you dealing with PSE&G? Is there, these are all sort of things that you need to look at. When you're dealing with urban, the urban real estate, you're gonna look at higher prices right there. I mean, if you're looking at industrial space, you are competing with basically Amazon, if you think about it. Anyway, that's doing internet industrial space even before cannabis was going through the roof because suddenly during the pandemic, we're all at home, we're all getting delivery, and people need industrial space in warehouses. So it's already going to be higher. When you're also looking at that and setting these old buildings, you have to look at make sure you have site engineer, look at what the existing structure is. Can you actually adapt it and reuse that infrastructure that's already there, the building that's already there, because you have these great old warehouses, but are you able to even use that? And that's where you can contact someone like Art, the Hanson Construction, I'm sure they speak to that, of showing someone, looking at the structural, you basically have to get a structural engineer and make sure that you can actually use that property. And those are the things you want to take and consider when you're looking at it.
Yeah, what's your take on that, Art?
This is kind of a subject that's near and dear to me, where in the early days of cannabis, medicinal cannabis in New Jersey, there was a bit of a land rush to find facilities that people could build out. And some of the owners did not do the due diligence. And, we've had projects where bringing in adequate electric could cost millions upon millions of dollars. If you don't have gas to make your own electric or use combined heat and power, you're out of luck. From a structural standpoint, Heather's absolutely right. We're suspending lighting, we're suspending cooling and heating piping and a lot of other things from the building. Can the building physically support it? And that's why if you're looking at a facility, it's important to get a team together ahead of time that can help answer these questions for you, because you may secure a space and then find out later that it really, the building itself inhibits you and how you grow, if you can grow at all.
So, Heather, as I know, you talk a lot about equity in the market as a whole, and so when it comes to equity in the market as a whole, where do you think some of the overall gaps are in terms of access? As it relates to people actually navigating the variety of legal things they have to do, navigating municipalities, zoning, all of these real estate laws, lawyer fees, things of that nature.
Sure. First thing I want to mention is, again, we talked about this prior to our call, is that New Jersey is #1 in the racial disparity and incarceration rates. We have a deep-seated history of the drug war affecting our state, and it's really unfortunate. People are in prison right now for marijuana while we're even having this conference right now, and I always think that's something to have in the back of your head and be cognitive of those people. And when we talk about arrest rates, when we talk about people in prison, we forget that each person that's arrested and when we talk about especially these social impact areas, we don't really realize that one person arrested going to prison, that's a family destroyed. That's a community destroyed. That's a neighborhood destroyed. It all kind of relates. So and then you wind up getting these areas that have been kind of desolate and blighted for a while because you have this impact from the drug war. Now, no one can say that my grandfather was a cannabis, in the cannabis industry. No one can say that because it's such a new industry. And we should keep that in our mind. This is a new industry. And yet it's not a diverse industry, unfortunately, right now. And the way, again, look into other states. Right now, we have the social equity, and I'm sure that New Jersey will kind of get on the ball with the social equity program and really provide training programs for people that are affected by the drug war. People in neighborhoods that are affected by the drug war for the social impact area, and it's about providing access to education, access to funding. Everything where there's a disparity of this industry is due to the lack of access. I'm a privileged white person. Someone I have more access, unfortunately, than a lot of people do that are affected in New Jersey, and that's something that we're recognizing shouldn't be. And so it's really, we should look into the state to look at other states of how they implemented this. How do they educate? How do they set up these businesses for success? How do they make sure that they had access to capital? Where to go? One of the nonprofit organizations I love is Rising Tide, which is an entrepreneurial organization that concentrates a lot on disadvantaged communities, and that's in New Jersey. And they deal with more of business entrepreneur programs all throughout the state. And that's a program, those type of programs applying to cannabis would be huge. So looking at nonprofits, looking at our state to really provide access to education, access to funding in order to start up this, and resources to start up into the industry itself.
Great. And so, Art, and this will probably be the last question we have since we're bumping up against time here.
An easy one.
Well, all right. Let's say that I'm a new client that essentially wants to construct something. What is it that I need to have figured out exactly?
I think the biggest thing is to know your funding stream, because that's going to determine what you build. And I think that too often people get very wrapped up on all the other things, and there are many, many of them. But ultimately, you've got to have the funding in place to be able to build, to be able to secure that facility, put the team together, and build the facility out and get operational. Excuse me. I think that's, when we talk about social equity, I think that's the real point to concentrate on, of how we provide funding to make these micro licenses a reality.
All right. Well, with that last question, I thank both of you, and we will move on to our next panel. Thanks to the both of you for pulling up. All right. So I'd like to welcome our panelists for our second panel discussion, how mayors are preparing for the marketplace. We have Alexon Clayazos, who is a public affairs specialist working with the Beagle Group, a full-service public affairs, political consulting, and digital media firm. She recently worked with GTI&J to open Rise Pyramis. She is also executive board member at the New Jersey Hispanic Research and Information Center. We have Mayor Janice Kovach, who is the mayor of the town of Clinton and is the president of the New Jersey State League of Municipalities. And we also have Mayor Dwayne B. Warren, who is the mayor of the city of Orange and the chair of the Committee on the Cannabis at the New Jersey Urban Mayors Association. And he is also the Northern Vice President. How's it going today, everyone?
All is well.
Good. And so, let's go ahead and start with you, Alexon. Explain your process for. I know we touched on a lot of this in the previous panel, but explain the process for educating municipalities on behalf of the clients. What has stayed the same since legalization, and what has changed in regards to that process?
Thank you. So good morning. The process. So again, we advise and consult with several clients on that space, but the process of educating municipalities and elected officials, we've been doing this for a very long time. It started back in 2018 when the licenses were still, from that very first process of getting the licenses in 2018. And at that point, again, we did not know much of what the rules were going to be before getting the licenses. So originally it was kind of getting our clients getting to know New Jersey. New Jersey is complicated, we all know that. But even after the licenses were given, our clients needed to just not truly get involved in those communities that they were going to set shop in. And that was our job, to make those introductions to the local elected officials, community outreach groups. But it takes a really long time. One of the things that I've been emphasizing is that we have come in and introduced ourselves to these communities that really don't really understand what this cannabis industry in New Jersey is. And so the process is very long because we have to start from zero, explaining that this medical cannabis industry has been in place in New Jersey for a lot longer than for 10 plus years at this point. There has been a small project, but there has been it's been established already. Educating the communities as to what this is, meaning getting elected officials comfortable with the idea that it exists, and being sympathetic to, again, municipalities as to all of the fears that they have as to what this is, because again, the education has been lacking, for better word. We haven't done a really great job on educating what this industry is. So walking through the process, through what New Jersey has gone through in the last few years, why we're where we are in terms of now adult use. First of all, expanding the medical use program and what that means to municipalities, and explaining that, because again, some municipalities and some people, did not know that this was even in place, and not just municipalities, but a lot of people did not know that this was even in place in New Jersey. So that took a while in getting them comfortable to what this is, and also what New Jersey thought and had the vision of what New Jersey had of what this should be like, meaning that the standards were going to be very high. Dispensaries were going to have a pretty high standard. And then with the adult use, obviously the conversation got much more complicated, and in big part because municipalities now have to make decisions that they are not interested in making at this point, simply because education is not there. The guidance is not truly there, hasn't been there. So they have now huge responsibilities of making decisions as to what kind of regulations they want to have, what the town, what their vision is of their towns based on cannabis, and make those regulations without, again, a lot of guidance from the state, unfortunately, and it's a huge burden on them. So the first thing is just have sympathy for where they are, because they have a lot of responsibilities on their end.
And so the next question is for both mayors, both Mayor Kovach and Mayor Warren. We'll go ahead and start with Mayor Kovach. We can answer the question first. What guidance are municipalities looking for?
What we're looking for is the ability from a zoning perspective that we will be able to determine what will allow in which of our zones. We know industrial zones, whether, to allow all the different pieces. The commercial zones giving us the ability to say, yes, we do, or no, we don't. We also want to have the ability to create host agreements. This is I say this all the time, and we're trying to change 60 years of behavior in 60 days, right? I grew up in a generation of just say no to drugs. So, and there's a lot of people that are still struggling with understanding, and it's not a matter of being afraid of cannabis, which I think we tend to get tagged with, that towns are afraid of it. It's not that we're afraid of it. We're not sure what it looks like in our communities, and we have nothing to compare it to. Yes, you've got Massachusetts or Colorado or California, but we don't have an exact comparison. I know if a liquor store comes in, what another liquor store looks like. I'm not necessarily sure what a cannabis store is going to look like. So it's understanding that we have the control locally. New Jersey is a home rule state. The Constitution gives us that ability. We want to make sure that we don't lose that ability to make the determination of what fits in our community. And maybe in my community, a micro license works, but not a full, grow facility and a larger entity. Those are the things that we're looking at. We also want to be able to license ourselves and make sure that if there's an issue, that if there's you have a bad actor, we're dealing with companies and individuals we've never done business with before. You could potentially get a bad actor, and if they come in, the town wants to be able to then say, listen, no, your license gets pulled because you're not following A, B, C, and D of the regulations that have been established by the state, that we have the partnership with the state to make sure that can be done.
Mayor Warren.
Thank you, and thank you for convening this panel. There's a lot to be learned. There's a lot of information to develop, especially from the municipal side, where we have always been the keys in terms of moving the economic engine and making small businesses thrive, because that's what we live on and that's what empowers our communities. I'm sure the mayor can tell you that a number of businesses come every day wanting to do business in the town, but we have never seen anything like this before, and we certainly ought to be prepared. The one thing that we're looking at is the statute allows municipalities a great latitude in terms of developing regulations and licensing requirements. Those we have to really be particular about, because what might be good in Clifton may not work well in Orange. Our transportation routes may be different. Our neighborhoods are different. Our commercial zones and residential zones may be different. So I think it's incumbent upon municipalities to pay close attention to the contours of their municipality and develop regulations and licensing requirements on a local level that reflect the values of the town. The businesses have to know that they cannot operate in our town without the town license first. And that's where our first guard is, that we put in the specifications that make sure that our towns are protected. And then, of course, the state has to honor that and make sure that those guidelines are carried forth as well. But as that gives us guidance in terms of protecting our communities, it also gives us incentive to help economize our community, where we can encourage small businesses, where we can make sure that this industry brings in businesses that are fair and equitable across the board. There are a number of issues that keep certain people out of this business. This is the first time, and I've been a lawyer for 30 years, this is the first time where legislation is specifically focused on those people who were previously offended by the marijuana laws. And I think locally we should reflect that as well. Certainly in Orange, we're going to reflect that people who had prior involvement with marijuana convictions be given an opportunity to come and correct the record and set it straight and be part of this economic boom. We think it is going to be an economic boom. It's different than the marijuana or the weed or you guys aren't old enough to know what the roaches are back in my day, but it's a different time, and the industry and the substance itself has far more reaching uses, impacts, and benefits for our community than when my father told me, just don't touch it, walk away from it. So given that, we need to start to prepare for it. I don't think we can run away from it, but we need to make sure that the economics of it flows across the board.
Yeah. I have a question for you, Alex. Many advocates and social equity applicants have cited the intense lobbying required to get a business operational as a barrier. Others cite it as the only way they can reach decision makers. What say you to both of those perspectives?
Say the last part of it.
What say you to both of those perspectives?
In terms of micro-license, so they are correct that this is very expensive. It is a very expensive venture. And for micro-license and people who reach in and local entrepreneurs, I mean, I think that whatever the rules from the CRC are going to be, key on how expensive this is going to be. I do think that we have to be thoughtful, because right now, again, we don't have everybody is trying to guess what this map looks like. And doing that requires a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of expertise, a lot of knowledge of what New Jersey is, what the politics, what the structures are, which is the reason why people would hire someone like us. But entrepreneurs don't have the funding to spend that much money on this and waiting to see if something happens and for us to guess what the next step is. So in terms of the social justice item, which I think about it a lot, those rules have to be clear, and you have to have them more accessible for everyone, so they don't have to spend whatever amount of money is for someone to read a document that they need to get from someone that they know, from a lawyer that they understand. So the rules have to be a lot more clear, and I think this is a big job from CRC, and especially in the social justice program, because if we want entrepreneurs, people of color, minorities, women, to actually apply and be successful at it, whether it's a micro licensing, whether it's a dispensary, whether it is actually being part of a team, they need to be educated and they need to have those tools. Right now, they don't have it. Right now, unfortunately, multi-state operators with a lot of experience are the ones who have access to all of this information. So I am concerned, but I do have hope that the CRC is going to address those issues and is going to come up with guidance, clear guidance, so people can have a legitimate chance of being part of this industry without having to hire 3 or 4 lobbyists, 3 or 4 lawyers, and all the other things that involves this industry.
Okay. I've got a question for both of the mayors. We'll go ahead and start with Mayor Warren. My question for Mayor Warren is, what does the town of Orange want from the cannabis industry? And for Mayor Kovach, what exactly does the League of Municipalities want from the cannabis industry? And so let's go ahead and start with you, Mayor Ward.
Certainly, we want success, but we want it done safely, and we want the economics to proliferate across the town. And so, our first measure in any legislation, I've drafted legislation now that's under council review, is that we make sure that it's done safely and that it be in places that have no negative impact on our children in our neighborhoods and in places where families may want to congregate. That's the first thing, is safety. Secondly, we want to make sure that we are compliant with, and that we stress that any licensee that wants to come to Orange that has to commit to a community plan. How will your business impact our community in a positive way? That's going to be part of our licensing requirement. And then we want to make sure that there is gross participation across the board, where people who were impacted, people who may have criminal records, and people who are Black, brown, women, and disabled vets have an opportunity to open a business. You know, that piece about the lobbying a state legislator, I am sensitive to that as well, and I've told licensees that, especially our small businesses and minority-owned businesses, that your mayor, your council, your municipality is going to be your chief lobbyist, because to the point that applicants come to Orange that qualify in those areas where I think we need to have the most impact, I'm going to be in Trenton, making sure that our voices are heard to make sure that this impact is felt across the board. That's why with the New Jersey Urban Mayors Association, we were part of meetings with the governor and his staff about how this legislation gets drafted, about how we make sure that people who were clouded out of the system are now a part of it. But we'll continue to do those kinds of things, because the big boys, the big political boys who can get the lobbying dollars, who can get the influence, yes, they get a higher seat at the table. But I'm part of a group of mayors that come. I have 30,000 people behind me. Other mayors have even more behind them. And so we go to Trenton and speak to the governors and to the regulators. It's a different kind of voice, and it's a voice that's on par with any lobbyist. We just have to be courageous enough and have the parameters defined enough in our own towns on how we lobby for those businesses to be part of our economic fabric.
And I would just echo all of that. I mean, I don't think it's any different from the league's perspective. You know, obviously, mayor's talking from not just the city of Orange, but from the urban mayors. The League of Municipalities has been a partner with the urban mayors on this initiative from the beginning. You know, and to Alexion's point, education is going to be key. We're trying to understand an industry that we have not had here in New Jersey before. So the more that we can do to raise awareness and to educate and to show all of the good actors who are in this space, I think will go a long way for most of the mayors.
We'll go ahead and start taking some questions from the audience here, and anybody can hop in on them. What is New Jersey learning from other states' difficulties with cannabis licenses?
I'll just jump in, because what I hope we learned, and I know we discussed this in many meetings, that the makeup of our commission also has to be reflective of this kind of attitude, that the cannabis industry is going to be far-reaching and is going to be an economic boom for everyone, and no one's going to be left out. So the way that that's structured and the qualifications required to be on the commission are part and parcel of our understanding about how licenses will be given out. The other thing is that included in our legislation, I think is powerful, is this taxing authority and the authority for local licenses to be issued under conditions that reflect local values. Those things are very important to us, and you'll find any municipality will find that they'll get guidance if they reach out to the League of Municipalities, if they reach out to the urban mayors. Barbara George Johnson, who's our executive director, has done a great job in putting together a policy bank so we can do the kinds of education that we need to small businesses as well. So the things that are critical to us, home rule, while home rule is important to New Jersey, it's even more effective as we start to put regulations in and have licenses come from the bottom up instead of the top down.
Agreed.
Another question we have from the audience is landlords, and specifically landlords who may be hesitant to rent to a cannabis dispensary, or landlords that may be charging an above market and above premium price, to rent that dispensary. So, who wants to go ahead and talk about that concern?
That's an issue with everything, I think. I mean, obviously, they're looking at this as a potential cash grab or a cash cow. But any time where you have price gouging with regards to landlords, I would hope that would be raised to the elected officials, so that many times we wouldn't necessarily know that they're being overcharged. This has to be a concerted effort to ensure that everything is done in a way that is beneficial to the community as well as to the entrepreneur who will be opening the facility in whichever community they happen to be in.
And what about you, Alexandre? What's been your experience in dealing with the landlord dynamic and your convincing of town?
Again, at this point, because it is the competition is so fierce that they're able to do this. Again, the big, multi-state operators who can do this, they can afford to do this right now because the competition is so fierce. Now, that's going to become a problem, obviously, with entrepreneurs, with local, smaller projects coming in, because they won't be able to compete. So that is, transparency would be an issue, but that's something that I think once we have more transparency and more rules of what is allowed or not, you will be able to at least address them. Right now you can't, because the competition is fierce. There is no reason to, a lot of people are securing, for example, spaces, and one of the issues that we're having, securing spaces for a year and a half, while licenses are being awarded. They can do that right now. It's a little bit insane that is happening, but again, it's competitive right now.
And Mayor Warren, what would you say to residents who may have that concern that they're going to get price gouged if they try to start a business?
Yeah, it's tough, and it's going to require us working with state regulators as well, across the board. But the one thing, the watchword that you heard, I think, came from my colleague, is that you want to have full disclosure, and you want our local regulations to require full disclosure about what your leasing arrangements are, about what your rent is. And the more times you bring those kind of things to light, the more you get compliance. But just as a consultant said, education is really going to be key, not just to those who open businesses, but to landlords as well. It's going to require extra inspections. It's going to require different kinds of inspections. It's going to require a review of your lease and possibly your financial records. That kind of disclosure seems to bring about compliance. But then there's also the bully pulpit of the mayor's office and the council's office, to bring the landlords in and say, that's just not fair. And the objective of having the licenses is to make sure that we have an economic benefit to all. But we have to be very frank and very blunt about it. We know it's their property. We know they have constitutional protections in using the properties as they want, but it doesn't stop, and it shouldn't stop us from raising our voices that when we see inequities, we have to speak about it.
And I just want to raise one more maybe point on this, is that this is the reason why municipalities are so important on making sure that they have this conversation as to what kind of cannabis industry they want to have in their town. Like, what is it that they see Orange to look like? Ideally, what is it that Clinton wants to look like based on who they are, what the community is, and their vision of their plan. Do we want to have micro licenses? Do we want to limit it? Do we not? not just based on the state regulations, but also my town. And this is the reason why I feel that the state, it's a great idea that that those municipalities are tasked with thinking about their municipalities and what they want to do. At the same time, it can be a little burdensome, but I think that responsibility is going to fall eventually or right now to those to the local authorities, and that would probably ease some of those pains, basically.
Okay. And so another question we have from the audience here is, will towns be able to opt back in if they opt out by August 21st?
Yes.
All right. Question answered.
But I just want to, just in answering that question, I want to stress to communities and to governing bodies particularly, if you do opt out with the plan to opt back in, use this time wisely to make sure you have the appropriate regulations and licensing requirements so that when you do opt back in, you're doing it under your own terms instead of terms that could be set by the state or just by happenstance.
Exactly.
Yeah. Another question that we've been receiving is, how exactly is this going to work for those who may not have the access to capital? Access to capital has always been talked about to succeeding in this industry. So, what role can lobbyists or the league and Urban Mayors Association play in that? Let's go ahead and start with Mayor Kovacs.
I would hope that if there is someone who's looking to become an operator and look through a micro license and they don't necessarily have the funding, that they would go to a community, create that partnership with the community, and let the community, electeds and the residents themselves, be the advocate for the licensing. I get especially right now, the unknown, but as we move forward, I think as you start to see the businesses opening up, you'll have elected officials who are willing to go out on a limb for especially if it's someone locally who's looking to do a business. If one of my residents comes to me and says, I don't have the money to hire a lobbyist and, multiple attorneys, can you help? I would absolutely, do all I could to help those residents and move their applications forward if I could.
Mayor Warren.
Well, we have to pursue the cannabis business like we do every other business. I'm sure the mayor is on a constant plea with people to come in to invest in their town, whether it be through housing, whether it be through commerce. And I share the same duty that we're always seeking to have people come in to invest in our town. That's a responsible way. And the same thing would happen with cannabis. And there are certain amount of incentives that we do have within our purview to sort of jumpstart that kind of excitement, from pilots and tax incentives to the federal opportunity zones that already exist, UEZ zones. My law department will be a reservoir, a database for people who are trying to navigate the legal part of the licensing, so there'll be some help there as well. So the kinds of general expenses that they'll have, such as legal, such as lobbying, such as the red tape through the license requirement, I want to make that part of our municipal structure as well, so that some of the burden is lifted off entrepreneurs. But we're going to do our part to make sure that our towns are attractive for investment, that we have a market here, and we're going to market the things that are good for us. Both Clifton and Orange share a good space in terms of transportation, major highways going through it, access to the airports, train stations. We have 2 here in Orange. Those kinds of things would be our incentives to attract financiers and business people to come to our town. So we have to use the tried and true measures of getting businesses to come to town, except now it's going to be for cannabis instead of some other business.
And you want to go ahead and talk about that, Alexa?
I'm hoping again that within the CRC regulations and with the EDA, that there are some legitimate funding from the state, from somewhere, again from the state, to kind of help the process of educating and giving people the tools that they need in order to really start this process and educating themselves and getting themselves ready for opening out for because you want them to have a true success. I mean, the application process is extremely expensive. It's time consuming. If we are really thinking that entrepreneurs can have this, we need to give them the tools. So I'm hoping that some of the funding would come from the state, from, again, the different sources. Again, I hope that the CRC does put some requirements or some regulations on that end. Again, this is me, my wishful thinking. But listen, the EDA right now is a perfect place in my brain where we can start setting up some sort of funding available for this. What the regulations would be is it would be interesting, but I truly hope so that there is some sort of funding available.
All right. Well, the last question that I have for everybody, and I'll go ahead and start with Mayor Warren, Mayor Kovach, and then we can have a few out. So, what are the most pressing issues that keep you up when it comes to this?
Wow. So I really resort back to the protection of our children. I just can't shake my history and the decades that I grew up in. So I have to be vigilant about making sure that as curative as cannabis may be, that it does not get into the wrong hands, that it does not improperly influence our children, and that they always maintain health and safety, and that those family spaces where parents want to make decisions about whether or not to expose their children, those places are safe, and that can be left in the discretion of families. So that is really the most pressing thing for me. And then after that, making sure that there's equality in economics for all. This is a new and burgeoning business. It's a different time economically. Now more than ever, ex-offenders are returning to urban areas, many times without skill, many times without opportunity, and this may be the defining opportunity for them, and so we want to make sure that's administered well. And then the other thing is the big people in the business, the ones who have the money, the ones who have the might in this business. It's incumbent upon us, and I think about strategies often on how we encourage them to now invest in micro businesses and in other kinds of businesses that'll make this flow across the board. I'm not sure that the big companies have been approached with any kind of creative ways to do it. I'm not sure that we have spoken enough in terms of the regulatory process about encouraging them to do it, but that's going to be part of our direction and our focus, at least with the urban mayors, to start to go back to the legislature, to certainly go before the commission, to make sure that there are incentives for those who have the might in the industry to share with those who are just starting out.
And I don't think I could have said it any better. You know, I'm going to go back to the league and the urban mayors are partners. And, you know, 565 municipalities, we all have our unique personalities, but ultimately we all have the health and public safety of our communities and our residents as, you know, the forefront of any decisions that we ever have to make.
And on my end, listen, I'm really excited about this industry. I mean, this is exciting times for what this industry can do to New Jersey's economic, boom. And so it's exciting. At the same time, I truly hope so that we take advantage of this. It's an emerging industry. There's a lot of opportunities for, again, social justice, increasing this opportunity to a lot of people who should be part of this industry instead of staying aside. And I think New Jersey truly is, first of all, we have the political will, we just need to get there, but we do have the political will, the interest, the tools to make this happen, that it really, to make sure that other people are truly part of this industry and not, again, the few multi-state or the few giants of this industry. We do need to put in the time and be thoughtful about this, but there is enough business for New Jersey to create that equity that we keep talking about.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. That brings us to the end of our second panel. Thanks again for joining us. You can chat more with Alex on at the Blue Joe Group on level 1. And everyone, enjoy networking. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just completed the update to the public and served on a panel regarding cannabis in the state of New Jersey. As the Vice President of the New Jersey Urban Mayors Association, I've been tasked with chairing the Cannabis Committee, and part of our effort is to inform people statewide about this cannabis business, about the regulatory process, and to make sure that municipalities like Orange get their fair share. Part of my job today was to be part of an informative panel that hopefully will be used by governing bodies, by lawmakers, and certainly by people on the commission who have to make decisions about regulations and licensing requirements. As we engage in this cannabis business and as Orange nears its time to deal with it ultimately through ordinance, I do want to keep you abreast of all the activities that I'm engaged in statewide to make sure that our voices are constantly lifted, and to make sure that the cannabis industry is one that's fair and equitable across the board, that minorities are involved, that women are involved, that disabled vets are involved, that people who have been negatively affected by enforcement of marijuana laws are involved as well, and to make sure that out of this industry not only comes economic prosperity, but also the kind of treatment, prevention, and attention to children's activities that will make our society better and that will make our communities rise. I'm Mayor Dwayne Warren. This is the City of Orange Township.